Hey, what up everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today, as voted on by my subscribers 9 months ago, we're talking about Ted the Caver. I was originally going to talk about Jeff the Killer, but to be dead honest with you, I just didn't care about the subject at all. So I decided to move on to the next one, and oh boy, am I very excited to talk about this story. Growing up, I knew close to nothing about Ted the Caver. Of course, I knew its impact on the genre of horror, and I definitely respected it, but I knew close to nothing about the story itself, its themes, the author, or even the setting, though I could vaguely put together that it was set in a cave, since why else would you point out that the main author was the cave explorer? Ted the Caver is considered by most to be one of, if not the very first creepypasta. There's a bit of confusion over the definition of a creepypasta. Whilst the colloquial definition is perceived as just internet campfire stories, I'd say we're far beyond that point at this point. Sorry, my grammar's really shit. If you're asking me, a creepypasta is a horror story designed to look real by using a format told using the internet. This means I get to include media such as Wii Deleted and Petscop, but I also think that the genre has just developed further from the original definitions made in the late 2000s and early 2010s. I know this definition is a tad confusing, and I do intend to make a video very soon that goes through not only the definition of the word, but the history of the genre, and giving a brief overview of a bunch of different stories that you may want to give a little read, yeah. Anyhow, when the story was released, it created quite a huge splash, with some people even believing it was real. Whilst this is laughable these days, you have to remember that these people didn't have anywhere near the same amount of information at their disposal as we do now. Also, as mentioned previously, this was the first time anything like this had ever been done. One piece of media that I could compare this to directly would be the 1999 horror movie classic The Blair Witch Project, with its entire ARG marketing campaign attempting to trick people into believing the events of the movie were real, and even frightening some people leaving the movie theaters that fateful October evening. And this wasn't an unintentional parallel. The creator of the creepypasta said himself that it was a deliberate inspiration taken from the way that the movie presents itself. And without further ado, let's finally discuss the creepypasta itself already, man. Due to the overwhelming number of requests I've received to tell my discoveries and bizarre experiences in a cave not far from my home, I've created this webpage. I will outline the events that happened to me during these past few months, beginning with my journey into a familiar cave in December of 2000, and ending... well, it hasn't ended yet. I will be using my caving journal as the text to tell you about my recent experience. I will give them to you as I experience them, in chronological order. These are the seemingly normal yet slightly ominous first words that welcome us into the world of Ted's caving journal. The first entry being uploaded on March the 23rd, 2001, cloaked in darkness on a lone Angel Fire site. With these simple 93 words, we're welcomed into the uneasy caving expedition started by Ted and B. I should probably introduce you to the characters. What's going on? Basically, this is a blog ran by a guy called Ted, a cave diver who decides to go cave diving with his friend B in a cave near his own home. If you're wondering the reason why he's called B, it's because he didn't really want to be on the internet. He's a private guy, which is fair. Not everyone wants their name on the internet, me included. I should state that this site is formatted very bizarrely, in a good way, with grey text taken directly from the caving journal, and blue text being Ted's present, at the time, reflections on what he had wrote previously. Before the story even properly starts, there is one thing of note. He mentions an overwhelming amount of requests for what happened, and I am partly curious at whom was asking all this. People in person? People online? Either way, it's what led to the creation of the site, and may have been a blessing at the origin of the site, though with what happens later on, it's more likely a curse than anything. The story starts with B and Ted deciding to go to Mystery Cave. I presume that's the cave's actual name, though Ted may have a writing quirk and wanted to keep the cave's name anonymous. Hey, yeah, future editing Woofination here. Yeah, it is a name to hide the thing. The cave is one in Utah that I'm too lazy to Google the name of. I just remembered it as I was going through and editing. Okay, goodbye now, go and enjoy the video. One thing I really like about Ted the Caver over other pastas is the weird details and slight tangents. Most creepypastas are too focused on being spooky, they never give the characters time to breathe, but Ted will sometimes just interlude the story to mention something offhandedly, like in this section where he mentions B was injured in a cave a few years back, and almost lost the ability to walk, yet he somehow managed to break through all of this and learn to walk again. I know that's barely a point of praise, but you'd be surprised at how many creepypastas brush over moments like this, and will just try to scare you right off the bat, and 9 times out of 10, it will totally fall flat on its face, because it wasn't built up by the characters or the world enough to get me invested in them to be scared. Sorry for the tangent, I'm a massive story writing dork, this is just a pet peeve of mine. After a brief nosy around, the two come across a small gap in the cave around the size of a glove. The wall where the hole found itself situated was 3 to 5 inches thick. After a very brief period of consideration had elapsed, the two decided that they were going to attempt to get through the gap, as what is in there could be untouched. Or as Ted describes it, a virgin cave. Yup. The main way that they could make their way into the cave would be by hauling in a cordless drill with a bullpen and a small sledgehammer. Also, fuck you Google for making me autocorrect bullpen to bullpen 4 times when writing this script. After this, Ted decides to name the cave Floyd's Tomb, after Floyd Collins. For those not in the know, Floyd Collins was a cave explorer who got trapped in a cave after a bunch of rubble collapsed on his foot. He was trapped there for 17 days before succumbing to his wounds and dying, with several expeditions attempted in vain desperation to save him. These would all prove futile, as mentioned a few seconds ago. He died. But the choice of the name stands out to me as something bizarre, like subtle foreshadowing for the horrible fate that these two would take. I don't think it's supposed to be an exact parallel, but the choice to name it Floyd's Tomb, it's a bit like wishing bad luck on yourself. A little further down the page, he says something a tad alarming. In retrospect, it's sort of funny how simple I thought it was going to be. I figured a few hours work and we would be in. Had I known how long it was going to take, I doubt I would have even begun the project. Had I known what I was going to experience in the cave, I never would have returned. This gives us a head up that this isn't going to be all peaches and gravy. I'm not quite sure anybody going into this expecting a creepypasta will be all that shocked, but hey, this was kind of not classed as that at the time. So I'm sure people at the time were shocked. By the end of January, they had spent around 4 hours on it, and had made decent progress. The method of which they had chiseled away at the gash was considered awkward. I know nearly nothing about cave diving, so I'm just going to read you an excerpt again. To begin work, we had to get down on our knees and do our best to avoid smacking our heads on the ceiling. Working in this awkward position, we would drill into the wall around the hole. This would be difficult work. We really had to push the drill, and it was slow progress. Then we inserted the bullpen into the hole and then hammered on it until the rock broke. Then we would repeat the process. To give you an idea of how slow it went, the typical size of rock that would be broken off was about the size of my fingernail. If we broke off a large piece, about 1/3 of my palm, it was cause for celebration. I do really like the in-depth explanations on how Ted and B do stuff. It gives a certain level of authenticity, documentariness, to not only the process itself, but it feels a lot more alive and connects to what I mentioned earlier about tangents and such. You could probably tell this from the editing, but along with the in-depth explanations, there are also photos taken by Ted of different aspects of the caving journal, from the image of B to the hole itself. It honestly makes the story a whole lot scarier with how, well, not only real, but low budget it looks. I mean, like, obviously it looks real, Woofy Nation. In 2001, CGI would have really struggled to produce something so advanced on a huge budget, let alone a website being programmed by some guy in his bedroom. But think of this from a writer's perspective. These guys wrote a story, went into a cave, took photos relating to the story, and then added them to the site so they could scare children on the internet. I respect the dedication. This does bring up the question of why. But trust me, we'll get back to that later. This next section only further increases the realism as Ted goes into detail about the atmosphere of the cave. I don't really have much to add analysis-wise. I just thought this section was really cool and further strengthens the connection to this being a real caver who discovered an untouched part of the earth. An early part of modern creepypastas that has kind of been lost is the focus on realism in the stories and focused on how, get this, real it was. And in the present day, this is definitely, at least to a certain extent, lost. Though this definitely still translates into modern creepypastas in a way, with them all being written from the first person, with that aspect in particular lingering even until now. The next journal is dated February 10th, 2001. Bea and Ted making their way to the cave in pitch black darkness, making a late start and driving there fully encroached in darkness. When I tell people I go caving at night, they wonder why. They don't actually stop to think that it is always night once you go inside the cave. That quote is honestly one of my favourite lines, maybe even the favourite line of the whole fucking story. Like, there's nothing spooky about it. I just think it's funny. It just adds character to Ted. He's a funny guy. For this trip, Bea and Ted decide to bring Bea's Jack Russell Terrier, Whip. Family Guy reference.
Whoa, ass ahoy.
I was not at all concerned about taking the dog into the cave. We have taken her before. She is well behaved inside the cave. Their general plan was to break away at the hole and put the dog through it to see if there's a big drop. If there is, then the dog would come back. Compared to other times the duo have been down, they get down really fast, mainly due to the lack of tools compared to last time. It is mentioned that Ted did bring down some more batteries, and they left a lot of equipment in the cave itself, instead of spending precious time taking it back and forth and back and forth. As shown from how untouched the cave is, I doubt anyone's going to be going in there to steal their stuff. With the dog strapped alongside them, they still made it down pretty quickly, which is when things began to go horribly, horribly wrong. It started off normal, with the dog running around the cave between Ted and Bea, before the dog would slow down and run out of juice, sticking behind one of the two men. According to Ted, she seemed edgy, like she saw something she didn't like. She acted as if Satan himself was lurking in the darkness. This would lead into whimpering, her hair standing on edge, and cowering behind Bea. She had to be coaxed into moving forward towards the hole. This was until it was decided it would be best if someone were to stay guard near her, and the other one chipped away at the hole. One thing I didn't think about at the time was how she would not take her eyes off the hole. We should have been more observant of this intuitive animal. Things would get even more bizarre when Ted is getting his head in for a kip, with Bea working on the hole, when he then turned around, clearly distressed. When he asked what happened, he mentions hearing a sound blaring out the hole. Weird. They sat in the dark for half an hour before deciding to return to the surface again. The next journal was on March 3rd to March 4th, 2001, and is off to a bit of a different tune, with Bea and Ted leaving in the afternoon so that they can reach the cave before all the traffic arrives in town. Smart, I'd hazard to guess. The conversation in the car was subdued and quiet, with the two giving ideas at what all the unusual stuff was. They get down to the cave and begin to work profusely, the pile of rock slowly expanding until a little while in, something bizarre begins to happen. A loud scream of pure terror, which Bea predicted it lasted about 10 seconds, with Ted's estimate being slightly shorter. I like how he describes the scream though. It's difficult to tell how much time passed when you're listening to a solo from the depths of Hades. The scream itself sounded like a cross between a man screaming in fear and a Kruger screaming in pain. A disturbing visual I have now imprinted in your mind. If I have to think about this unnerving sound, then so do you. Not mentioned up until this point is the atmosphere, because, oh my god, it's immaculate. The best way to describe it is, it feels like the tension will be broken every time you read onto a new line, but it never is. At least not for now. It's just this long period of tension that goes unbroken for nearly the whole time. And, before long, they had finished the entrance into the cave. Ted and Bea just barely managed to finish it, and obviously deciding to try and fit through it, that's what they do. They attempt to make their way into Floyd's tomb. Exhale, scoot, stop to catch my breath, repeat. I love how simple this description is. It reminds me of the Mental Floss article about Floyd Collins. Would you look at that? Coming full circle. Finally, Ted would make his way into the cave and see a structure marked with a hieroglyph, which he draws so that the viewer can see it. The first expedition into the cave is capped off with another ominous sound. This time, it's rocks falling. Ted decided to leave the cave, mildly scared. That's pretty much how I feel about caves in general. I love to go in, but I feel really good when I get back out again.